social critic, author of 7 books, including The Beauty Myth, The End of America. She's joining us here in New York.
In fact, it's because of my 23 years of supporting rape victims, working in rape crisis centers, traveling around the world to report more than any journalist I know, which in a way I've been very blessed to have had the chance to do so, from Sierra Leone to Bosnia, to Ireland, to the United Kingdom, interviewing people who support rape victims and work with the legal system. It's because of that that I'm raising my voice about these very ambiguous and corrupt allegations. First of all, let me just correct you and Jacqueline. The Guardian account, which is based on leaked original documents, doesn't say that he had sex with either of these women without their consent. The reason I'm hearing from rape victims across the world who are emailing me saying, I'm a rape victim, thank you for standing up to put these charges in context, is that this is the only case I've ever seen in 23 years of supporting rape victims, which is based on multiple instances of consent. If you read these allegations, he took off Miss A's clothes too quickly for her comfort. She tried to tell him to slow down, but then, quote, she allowed him to undress her. This is what the report says. The second woman says she woke to find him having sex with her. When she asked whether he was wearing a condom, he said no. Quote, according to her statement, she said, you better not have HIV. He answered, of course not. Quote, she couldn't be bothered to tell him one more time because she had been going on about the condom all night. She'd never had unprotected sex before. So if you're going to treat women as moral adults, and if you're going to take the issue of rape seriously, the person who's engaging in what he thinks is consensual sex has to be told, I don't want this. And again and again and again, these women did not say, this is not consensual. Assange was shocked when these were brought up as complaints because he had no idea that this was not a consensual situation. Miss A kept Assange in her home for the next 4 days and threw a party for him. So because I take rape seriously, because I'm aware that in 23 years, in Sweden, which has been criticized by Amnesty International for disregarding rape, for letting rapists go free, because you have a better chance in Sweden if you're a rape victim of, dying in an accident or getting breast cancer than having a serious rape allegation prosecuted or getting any kind of legal hearing, according to Amnesty International's report Case Closed. It's because of that that I know that these charges are utterly atypically handled. In 23 years, I've never seen any man in any situation this ambiguous involving this much consent have any kind of legal process whatsoever. And all over the world, women who've been gang raped, brutally raped in alleyways, pimped, prostituted, trafficked, their rapists go free. So yes, this stinks to me. And yes, it's about politics, because really this is about a journalist who has angered the most powerful and increasingly brutal nation on earth. And it's about all of us who are journalists being dragged into a dangerous situation because of criticism of the government.
Founder Julian Assange is back in a London court this morning to fight extradition to Sweden. He's wanted there for questioning in sex crimes investigations. Assange arrived in a van under heavy security. Earlier, he was asked about his decision to publish secret U.S. documents. Assange says he has no regrets. He said, quote, my convictions are unfaltering. I remain true to the ideals I have expressed. Assange relayed that message to his mother, who visited him in prison.
He's being held in the basement of the prison, right in the middle of the prison in solitary confinement. As a mother, I'm asking the world to stand up for my brave son.
Assange denies the allegations of sexual misconduct in Sweden.
Julian Assange's mum staged a one-woman protest outside Kevin Rudd's electorate office earlier tonight, demanding the Foreign Affairs Minister help her son or resign. For the latest, Nicholas Boot is in Brisbane.
The mother of Julian Assange arrived at Foreign Affairs Minister Kevin Rudd's office just before closing time today with a camp stool and a whole list of demands. Now, she says that the Foreign Affairs Minister hasn't done enough to help her son Julian, who is an Australian citizen. She's demanding that he write to the Swedish government and ask them to cease their extradition case against Julian.
To drop the extradition case against Julian on the grounds that he cannot now receive a fair trial.
She's saying if the Foreign Affairs Minister doesn't help her son, she's calling for his resignation.
If you are unable or unwilling to protect my son, when there are strong grounds to do so, I demand your immediate resignation.
Now, Kevin Rudd's office were aware that Julian Assange would be holding a press conference tonight, and they'd organised a consulate official to meet with Christine. She declined. She said what was in her letter was enough. Now, Julian Assange's job is normally a puppeteer on the Sunshine Coast. She goes around to the schools and the children and performs with her puppets. Today she was talking tough. She wants the Foreign Affairs Minister to deliberate over the weekend her demands, and by Monday she wants an answer or his resignation.
The Minister was very kind, and he listened very carefully to the things that I wanted to tell him, and then he asked many questions and detailed facts. He tells me that he is very concerned about being extradited to the US and concerned about the lack of justice that would ensue.
Él está muy preocupado de ser extraditado a Estados Unidos y también de la falta de justicia que ha visto.
And that he could be imprisoned for a long time, tortured or executed.
Y también que puede estar en la cárcel por mucho tiempo, ser ejecutado o ser torturado.
And that there would be no fair legal process in the US.
Maybe you can talk a little bit about it.
¿Acceso a Internet, por ejemplo?
Does he have internet access?
I believe so, and we're arranging for things like a sun lamp because he's not being able to get out into the sun, which will impact on his health.
Very much, Christine, for being here today with us in this show. Just to start, how do you feel about the work that your son has done and the effect that it's had on the world, on the policies of the United States, the reactions that have occurred since then, but also on his life and you as his mother, the perception that you've had of his work and what he's done?
When he initially started WikiLeaks, he told me that he was doing something to help people in repressive regimes to be able to, whistleblowers, citizen whistleblowers, to be able to get the truth out about some of the abuses that were happening inside their countries. And for 4 years, that's what happened. And his life wasn't in any way in any threat. He received awards for that work. But then when the documents came to the WikiLeaks Dropbox on America, things all changed. For some reason, it was all right to produce documents about other countries, but as soon as the United States was embarrassed, his life became threatened. So I have two reactions. One as a mother. Of course, I wish he'd never done it as a mother. Mm-hmm. But as a citizen, having investigated what WikiLeaks has done to bring transparency to the world about the abuses of power, the corruption, the kidnapping, extortion, aborting, torture, and fraud involved with big financial institutions, of course, I completely support my son.
So can you talk a little bit about your son? Who is Julian Assange?
He's not what a lot of the media says he is. He's a fairly simple living person. He's not at all materialistic. In fact, he has still has quite a limited wardrobe. The money that WikiLeaks makes, WikiLeaks is a not-for-profit organisation, and they are on modest wages, including Julian. So this was not in any way to create a financial empire. Some people are saying that it is. He's actually quite a shy person. He only went in front of the media in any sort of big way, when the American disclosures came out because he needed to defend WikiLeaks. And so it's not really his way to be in front of the cameras. And if you knew him personally, you would find that he's a little different from what you'd see in front of the cameras. He's much more relaxed. He has a very good sense of humour. He would smile more and laugh more.
Well, did you imagine, I mean, growing up or even in his early adult years, that this is something that he could have done?
No. He wanted to be a physicist, a molecular physicist, and there's another word for it. He wanted to discover the source of the universe. That was what he wanted to do. And I guess it's a similar sort of thing. He's always been about truth in some form, whether it was scientific truth or philosophical truth. So he has an incredibly inquiring mind. Even from a little boy, his question was always why. So very inquiring. He's actually quite a creative person. When he was about 5, he used to pick up the harmonica and play blues harp very, very naturally, and he can also draw. He's a bit of a Renaissance person, but chosen to direct it, and he can write beautifully. So he's chosen to direct his energies into WikiLeaks, which is basically journalism combined with the internet. He's a good father. He was a very young father, and many people don't realise this, but at a certain point, Julian's his son's mother was unable to care for Julian's son, and he stepped in and was a single father for many years, and he had sole custody of his son from the time he was about 18 months old. And he gave up his studies and gave up his career to stay home and look after my grandson until he went to school, and then just work part-time after that so that he could be a hands-on father.
Does he just have one child?
No, there are 2.
He has 2 children?
But I don't want to talk about
Of course.
because I'm trying to protect the family.
On that note, do you think that your son's life is in danger?
Absolutely. From the beginning, from the US, from politicians and from news commentators, they were screaming out for his murder in the most brutal way. There seemed to be no filter at all on how they were feeling, calling out for brutal forms of murder, inciting murder against my son. And still, in the last few weeks, there's been a Fox News presentator, I think it's Fox News, called Katie McFarlane, who was screaming out for Julian's execution. And this is somebody who has not broken the law and has done nothing more than any good investigative journalist would do, which is to bring the truth to the people, and has won very many awards for it.
Well, you're here in Ecuador. Obviously, you're advocating for your son. Are you here particularly to advocate for his political asylum request?
Yes, the Foreign Ministry invited me so that I could speak to him about what I knew of the conditions in Australia, for example, why the government has abandoned him.
Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, well, unfortunately for Australia, we have a Prime Minister who is can only really be described as a puppet for the US. Her approval rating is 27%. The people are not happy with her at all. And from the beginning, the Prime Minister condemned my son in the media, speaking ahead of a case which is unheard of in Australia, to speak about a case and commence judgment upon a person prior to a trial. She jeopardised his right to presumption of innocence by saying that what he did was illegal. She actually preceded the American government in those statements. And despite the fact that the Australian Federal Police, some 2 weeks later, decided that Julian had broken no laws at all in Australia, and the US Treasury had refused to blacklist WikiLeaks because they could find no crime that had been committed, the Australian Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, continued to defame my son in the media.
Do you think that the Australian government would hand Julian over to the United States if they had the possibility of doing so?
Absolutely. Now, this is a great concern given that the United States has been labelling its own citizens as low-level terrorists. So with America being within the top 5 countries for executing their own citizens in the world, and that actually escalating since 1987, from 1 a year to 98 a year, this is a great concern.
So your son has been possibly falsely accused, most likely falsely accused. He's now been detained for over a year and a half in England, and there appear to be secret grand juries against him in the United States and requests for severe punishment against him. What do you think would happen to Julian if he were extradited to the United States?
Well, I have some first-hand information on what was likely to happen, apart from what they're doing to one of their own soldiers, Bradley Manning, which the UN reporter on torture says is cruel and inhumane treatment, and is very concerned. I was on a panel, Eva, in Canberra, our capital city, about the asylum, and one of the other speakers was an Australian called David Hicks, who had spent 6 years in Guantanamo Bay. Now, President Obama came to office with the promise of closing down Guantanamo Bay, but it hasn't been closed, and in fact there's $30 million worth of fibre optics going into it as we speak. And David told all the audience about his treatment in Guantanamo Bay, and this is something that we could expect for Julian, if not worse, because David Hicks was a very minor player. So I'm terrified of what will happen to my son.
So, Christine, you're here in Ecuador to support his request for political asylum. You've met with the foreign minister, you've met with the president. Do you think that he's going to get political asylum here?
I can't say that. All I can say is that I was very impressed by the level of intelligence and knowledge already that the foreign minister and the president and his other ministers, I've met with other ministers today as well, had of the case. Much more than my government was willing to admit. If they do know, or they've been given the evidence, has had no understanding of it or deliberately misrepresenting it to the people. They were very warm. I felt very comforted by being with these good people. I felt that their concern for Julian was genuine. They have expressed that they believe the case is political, and that really disgraceful the way that the rule of law has been abused, and the abuse of my son's human rights and legal rights. And they are going to be looking at every detail so they can make a sound decision. And they're leaving no stone unturned to find out the truth. And that's all I can ask of them at this stage.
The documents that have been published by WikiLeaks have been incredibly useful for many of us doing investigative reporting in Latin America, because, of course, they've disclosed all kinds of different evidence of U.S. meddling in the affairs of all the countries in the region, and particularly against those that have progressive governments.
Yes, Ev, I don't know how much time you've got, but the one cable that moved me the most was the Haiti cable. Did you read the Haiti Libertarian?
Yeah, many of them, sure. It was clear evidence.
For the US to take advantage of a country that was going, for a poor country that was going through a horrific earthquake, and to use that and blackmail them to try and get their minimum wage attempts down or refuse them aid, and to block attempts by Venezuela to reduce the cost of oil to 60% so that Haiti could build its hospitals and schools. And then for the US Embassy to send a cable back from Haiti to the US saying the gold rush is on, to the same US contractors who were found doubling quotes and rorting after Hurricane Katrina. After I read that cable, that was it for me. I looked at others, but that was the one that I think touched my heart the most, of the lack of ethics and the brutal materialism to do that to a country, a poor country suffering that amount of distress.
Well, we thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview with us today.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Can you hear me? I am here today because I cannot be there with you today. But thank you for coming. Thank you for your resolve, your generosity of spirit. On Wednesday night, after a threat was sent to this embassy and police descended on this building, you came out in the middle of the night to watch over it. And you brought the world's eyes with you. Inside this embassy after dark, I could hear teams of police swarming up into the building through its internal fire escape. But I knew there would be witnesses, and that is because of you. If the UK did not throw away the Vienna Conventions the other night, it is because the world was watching. And the world was watching because you were watching. So the next time somebody tells you that it is pointless to defend those rights that we hold dear, remind them of your vigil in the dark before the Embassy of Ecuador. Remind them how, in the morning, the sun came up on a different world and a courageous Latin American nation took a stand for justice. And so to those brave people, I thank President Correa for the courage he has shown in considering and in granting me political asylum. And I also thank the government, and in particular Foreign Minister Ricardo Patino, who upheld the Ecuadorian Constitution and its notion of universal citizenship in their consideration of my asylum. And to the Ecuadorian people for supporting and defending this Constitution. And I also have a debt of gratitude to the staff of this embassy, whose families live in London and who have shown me hospitality and kindness despite the threats we all received. This Friday, there will be an emergency meeting of the foreign ministers of Latin America in Washington, D.C. to address this very situation. And so I am grateful to those people and governments of Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, El Salvador, Honduras, Mexico, Nicaragua, Argentina, Peru, Venezuela, and to all other Latin American countries who have come out to defend the right to asylum. And to the people of the United States, the United Kingdom, Sweden, and Australia, who have supported me in strength even when their governments have not. And to those wiser heads in government who are still fighting for justice, your day will come.
I came out with a press statement on the 31st of May, and within an hour, Jeremy Hunt, the then Foreign Secretary, thought it was appropriate to respond by Twitter and to say that I shouldn't interfere with the UK judicial system and that Julian Assange was free to leave the Ecuadorian Embassy at any time. Well, I have responded to him, and I said that, with all due respect, sir, but Mr. Assange was about as free to leave as someone who is sitting on a rubber boat in a shark pool.